And welcome to Thank You Five, a weekly show hosted by Strawdog Theatre Company, where we bring theater artists from around the globe into a conversation about live theater in a digital world with a spirit of gratitude and innovation. I'm Jamie Vann. I've been a Strawdog Ensemble member for 20 years this month, and I'm happy to be here on YouTube with this show. If you're watching this on YouTube right now, you can head over to strawdog.org/thankyou5 to join this chat, ask questions, and more importantly, vote on the questions so we know which questions you want to ask our panelists. And speaking of our panelists, let's introduce ourselves. David Lohr, welcome to Thank You Five.
Thank you. I'm David J. Lohr. I'm a playwright and podcaster. A lot of my shows are found at theincomparable.com, including The Incomparable Radio Theater, which is very silly. I'm also a part of the 2 a.m. theater conversation on Twitter from years ago, and I make theater wherever I can. Let's throw it to Matt Hawkins.
Hi, everybody. My name is Matt Hawkins. I've been in Chicago for about 20 years as a theater artist. Actually, Strawdog, you might have cut me from your website. I used to be an artistic associate. I don't know if I'm still anymore. You guys kind of did a thing.
There's culling that has to be done every once in a while. You know?
I just never got an email about it, but that's cool. I'm not going to take this opportunity to talk about it. So I worked in Chicago for 20 years, and I'm currently a professor out at the University of Notre Dame, trying to figure out how to do things in this world. And I'm going to hand it over to Stacy Stoltz.
Hi, I am Stacy Stoltz. I am married to Matt Hawkins. Actor, director. I worked in Chicago theater for 25 years, and now currently living in South Bend. Sometimes teacher. Trying to figure out where I fit in the world and in the theater. And I'll pass that on to Alex.
Thank you. I'm Alex Sunderhouse, a theater artist, actor, writer, originally from Cincinnati. Now I'm based in New York City. Been here 12 years, grinding, making cool theater, meeting cool people. I'm excited to do more of it.
Wonderful. Okay. So those are our panelists. So let's get right into it. The reason we're here. So tell us, what is theater? Stacy?
Well, since I'm going first,
yeah,
I'm going to talk about what theater is to me. I guess I don't really feel at home all the time in my life. But when I walk into a theater anywhere, Broadway, commercial theater, community theater, which I've been spending some time in South Bend, Indiana, I feel at home at the theater. Like my muscles relax, like my cells reconfigure, and I know what to do. I know how to be. I know all the rules, and I feel like I go because somebody's going to give me permission to have a lot of feelings. And I think maybe that's why other people go. They may not know that that's the agreement they're making. So whatever that is, home, church, yeah, I think I'll stick with that answer, and I'll pass it on to the next person.
That is a great answer. Who next? David, Alex?
David? I came to theater after trying all kinds of other media, and I feel like other media are theater adjacent, obviously. I mean, what is film and TV but filmed stories? What is a book but a story that you play in your brain? What is audio theater? It's, people reading the parts. but there is something, it's almost like they're splintered into fragments away from theater, because the magic of theater to me is being in the room with the people as they are living these lives, and the empathy that builds from sharing the same air with them, which of course is a problem in the COVID era, but that's a whole other story.
Sure.
There is just something magical about sharing that time and sharing that span of time with these people as they tell their stories. There's not the same kind of empathy for characters as when you're watching a film or a TV series. It's always the same no matter how many times you watch it. There's always that separation of the screen. But in a theater, you can go see the same show 5 nights in a row, and depending on how the audience reacts, it's a different show every night. It's just these little micro changes sometimes, but it is a different show, and that's magical. So there are a lot of things that I'm willing to call theater, but being in the room, being in the out in the open, if it's a site specific thing, that's the magic of theater for me.
That's great. Matt, you next.
Yeah, I
What
agree.
is theater?
What is? I'm going to agree with all the cliches that I prescribe to as well. It's a space, communal experience. We're together, we're people, permission to feel, like all that. I have to say now that, I mean, Stacy had mentioned this, we've been in Chicago for 20 years and now we live in South Bend, Indiana. That's massively different. And I will say that I have learned that theater is massively different for the individual and the community. I know that sounds a little hippy dippy, but I think about for people who are religious, right? The priesthood belongs in the individual, depending on what your religion is. That's what I'm learning for community as well, because I thought theater was a thing in Chicago and I could define it for you. That's not the thing that we're doing now, and that's not to negate or be pejorative against the Chicago theater community and or community or civic theater, but I'm learning that theater is highly personal for everyone depending on their experience, and it feels as artsy and holistic as that. So I'm learning that I don't know what I'm talking about as a professional. I think we need to get our heads out of our asses and not be so pretentious about the thing that we do and listen to the people that are in our country. And that's what I think.
Thank you.
Nice.
Yeah, where I am is rural southern Indiana. I'm not from here. I'm a New Jerseyan in exile. Yeah, but I tried making theater here. This is a small, underserved community, kind of between Cincinnati and Louisville. We're right on the river, and people came out. We didn't say, "Hey, we're going to do shows that we're going to aim at this rural community." We did shows that we wanted to do, that we wanted to share, and people went with us. People trusted us, and that was kind of exciting. We didn't expect that. But yeah, it is very different from doing theater in a larger city like Louisville, a larger city like Chicago or New York. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah. Alex, how about you?
Hello.
Hey.
Gosh, going last. I'm like, yes, I agree with that. I agree with
Sure,
that.
that's all good.
For me, I think theater can be so many things, and I think finding difficulty defining it is part of what's exciting about theater. It's the same reason you can sit next to somebody in the theater and leave feeling differently, having felt differently in the show, have different, like, it's so expansive. So theater for me, I think I would define it as simply like any medium of live storytelling. And I agree that, well, I was gonna say, I think that there has to be an exchange between person to person, like audience actor, but I don't even think that's true. I think that theater can be made without an actor. But any storytelling that's done live, I would argue counts as theater.
Yeah. It's funny. When I thought about this question, theater's probably the one thing that when I walk into, I want you to redefine it for me. I want to show up and find out that I did not know what theater was until I watched this. And now suddenly my definition of theater has expanded because of what I saw, and I can actually think of times where that's kind of done that for me. It, I do think, and it was mentioned earlier, like over time, obviously our definition of what theater is for us as theater artists changes. Like you said, you move to a different place, you start working with different people, and your definition of theater changes. I also think that there's no denying that the pandemic changed a lot of our definition of what theater is. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing this right now. So I just wanted for you guys to talk a little bit about, like, so how did theater change, or your definition of theater? How did it change during the pandemic, post-pandemic for you?
It's funny, it kind of didn't, but I was already thinking in terms of, I've been doing audio drama now for 10 years, and saying to theater companies, you should be doing your own podcast series, not interviews, not panel discussions. I mean, not like this. This is good. This is good. No, it is. But so many theaters just rely on that as, hey, we're gonna make a podcast. We're just gonna talk about the actors and the writer. Hey, let's talk to the writer. Most people really don't care. But if you give them a taste of the kind of work you can do and the kind of stories you can tell, why can't we do that? There are a lot of theater companies that have resident companies, that have playwrights they're used to working with. We can make these things. We could do live streaming on YouTube. We could do it 13 years ago because we did it. If I can do it from here in the middle of nowhere, any theater company could do that. And if we had kind of paid attention to all that a few years ago, we might not have been caught with our heads buried in the sand when COVID hit, because all of that capacity was there 10 years ago, 8 years ago, 5 years ago. Theater companies didn't do anything with it because, oh no, it's only if you're in the room. It's only if you come see us.
Right. It didn't fit the definition of theater.
Exactly. And so
does it now?
I think it does. I'd like to think it does. I'd like to think we've learned from that. My definition hasn't changed, but I hope that, for a lot of people, it's kind of turning towards that, to say, hey, yeah, I could enjoy an audio show. I could enjoy something on live streaming. I could see something that, here's a show playing in Edinburgh, Scotland that I only heard about, but now I can see it. I'd like to see it. I'm not getting to Edinburgh, but so
how about for the rest of you? Any redefinition of?
My experience, really, I don't know that it necessarily redefined theater for me, but it really brought up all the reasons I like to be in the room for theater. I had friends acting in plays over Zoom, which I thought was so innovative for the time, and enjoyable, and the way they were able to communicate, elements that you would normally see on stage through Zoom was just so creative and really cool. But there was that sense, and I think, like David, you mentioned this in your earlier answer to what is theater, that sharing of the air, that, like, you don't feel the tension that is built, between everybody in the room, and then what it feels like for it to break. So really, it just made me appreciate when, we are able to do it in the same room, how important that is. But it also, I saw people in my community, doing shows in parks more, and that's a very common thing, but it was so bare bones, and just, being able to be outside far apart, all different types of shows being put up. And so there was something really lovely about creativity being sparked during that time, where you really had to think outside of the box, or outside of, the black box, the theater, whatever. So an appreciation really came up for me during that time.
Yeah.
I'll say I agree with you, David, that I felt like I had access to some plays and some artists that I would not have, some playwrights. The Apple plays, I don't know if anyone saw those during the pandemic. It was specifically written for the pandemic, and the actors, the characters were on Zoom, so it worked incredibly well. And I, at that moment, felt like it was a really exciting thing. I was personally at a moment where I was redefining myself as a theater artist. As a woman coming to middle age, I was struggling with getting roles. And so I was redefining myself, looking at the possibility of trying to direct or write. And the pandemic hit, and I was given an opportunity to direct something online. So it was essentially the first thing I ever directed by myself. And I was directing professional actors on Zoom. We recorded a performance, a production of Fefu and her friends. It was terrifying. It was frustrating to work with the internet, as we all know. And my longing and my desire to be in the room with people grew very strong. I learned a lot. We used props, and I dropped things off at people's houses. We found innovative ways to do movement and dance. And, it was exciting and thrilling, but the internet still was a nightmare. And I still longed to be in the room, in my church, in my home. So I guess I have a very conflicted relationship with watching plays online. I love the accessibility, but I feel like the space is sacred to be in the room. And I am not I'm not a tech savvy person. So at the time I felt, just at the mercy of this thing that I don't know about, the sound and the camera. I don't, so as an artist, I felt very limited.
Yeah. I know that during the pandemic, I repeatedly kept seeing things and thinking, wow, this really expands my vision of what is possible to do with theatrical performance, and then continually following it up by going, but that's not theater. That's something new that we've been driven to do, and it's expanding what we do, but that's not theater to me. As an audience member mainly, because I'm in a room, but it's not the room. I'm outside that room. This is more like cinema for me. Yeah, I just repeatedly had that experience with things.
Jamie, can I jump in?
Yeah, no, definitely.
I had I'm going to try to keep this brief. I had a pretty profound experience during the pandemic. For those people who track the university system, Notre Dame was one of the few schools that said, no, we're staying in person and we're doing the thing. So we did not go home. The whole Zoom theater thing, that was not our thing from an academic perspective. So when I hear and of course, Stacy was part of this, and I hear all that, I think I worked more during the pandemic than I had ever have. And it was great. It was pretty intense. And I'll throw this out there, and then I want to move on because I don't want to commandeer the conversation. But basically what happened was, if you all remember, I'm going to try to keep judgment out of this. At the time, we didn't have a whole lot of guidance from our government officials about what was what, right? Everybody was guessing what was happening. And I think I know Notre Dame sensed that and basically said, we're going to be our own city. So we brought our own scientists on, our own molecular engineers. Our provost was really good friends with Fauci. And we basically designed our own ecosystem of how and which to do all of our testing, all of our PCR stuff, our aerosol testing, our HVAC systems, everything. And we just kind of contained it. We went online for 2 weeks, and that was it. and everything else was in person. And we did classes outside, we had tents. It was pretty intense. So I'm in the musical theater department, so we're still trying to figure out how to produce this work. So I'll give you 3 examples, and I keep saying I want to try to move on, because 2 were very practical, and 1, the question of how did the pandemic change?
Yeah.
It has changed me systemically of how in which to create stuff. That'll be my 3rd one. So the first one was, we have a black box theater named after Regis Philbin, buried on campus, by the way. We saw his tombstone a couple months ago. We basically turned his black box theater into a movie set, and we did a musical inside. And I worked with the athletic department, the football team, and we got our molecular engineers over, and we were able to basically film it. It was pretty wild, and we had fans blowing, and we take our mask off because there's all this science about you can be with someone for less than 15 minutes at 6 feet apart, doing all this stuff. And we did all that. And the second thing we did was we had a production of a Jesus Christ Superstar, hilarious, at Notre Dame, that we were going to do that got canceled. We ended up, about being in communal experience, the weekend, because Notre Dame was also a host for all vaccines. So a lot of people in South Bend would come to Notre Dame to get their vaccines, because I don't know if this is true, but I'll say it online. In Indiana, not a lot of the vaccines were taken up. So Notre Dame and Purdue basically commandeered most of the shipments that were shipped to the state. So we were a big hub. So we ended up mounting Jesus Christ Superstar in our football stadium. And it was the first public performance that we had during COVID. And we had our students on platforms, right, all in the actual stands underneath the Jumbotron. We had a 50-person like folk choir. We had our 100-person like orchestra in the end zone. The audience sat on the field. We had Notre Dame Studios, who films the football team. They came out, and we basically did an arena show in the football stadium during COVID. So those 2 things were happening at the exact same time. And then the third thing that I want to mention, and I'll move on, this has to do with, it wasn't solving the problem, but it was like everybody else. We keep talking about systemic infrastructure challenges, right? And accessibility. And I got to be honest, I'm really not excited by everyone's solve of accessibility. Because you keep hearing them like, we're going to make things accessible. And then what do? Not really anything.
Yeah.
I mean, we all say it, or I know I'm going to write a letter and put it on my webpage. And I'm like, what do you really? Great, good job, everybody. So what we did is, with the help of again, university, say what you want about universities, but this university, believe in our new arts program, gave us a new research grant where basically, the idea was I had a new musical that a new student of mine wrote, that he's basically like the next Lin-Manuel. He's actually from Puerto Rico. He's got a brilliant compositional lyrical voice. And instead of trying to, and so, and Alex, you probably know this being in New York, and for those of us who try to do the pipeline, to try to get a show to New York is insane. There's really only like 40 Broadway theaters. 20 of them are already taken up by all your staples. I say that now, Phantom's closing. But the idea of trying to get there is insane. And if you get there, all your investors are not making any money back. And I just thought to myself during the pandemic, really assessing, what are we doing? What's our pipeline? I remember in Chicago, and Jamie and Kyle, you can probably, I know Kyle's backstage, but we can talk to him. I literally remember going, oh God, I hope Chris Jones gives me a good review so that I can go somewhere else, right? It was about us climbing the ladder, right? Even we were like, it's about the art. We all wanted to climb the ladder. That's all we cared about. And people won't tell you that, but it's true. And I got to the point, I said, the intention behind this new work of this new student of mine, I wanted everyone to experience this work. And I thought, trying to get money to do this thing, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. And thinking about social media and online, and I thought, well, how do we get this work to people? So I took the research money I got from the university, which was decent, not enough to raise funds for like a $20 million musical, but enough to get a studio cast recording. So what we did is we got some decent names to do a recording of a musical that basically hadn't existed yet. And that's what we're pushing out to high schools, community theaters, so people can license it directly, as opposed to going through, and nothing against unions and Broadway actors, because I support that 100%, but it takes a lot of money to get to New York to see some stuff, and to pay tickets and food and airline, and even the tours that come through, that shit's expensive too. And I just think we keep talking about accessibility, and everyone's like, I know, I'll do a musical and maybe bus in some kids from New York and say we did it, and the thing's closed in 3 months. Like, we keep seeing the thing happen. So that's the project we're working on right now. So basically, we turned our theater into a sound studio, and then the second one, we did a concert, arena concert in the stadium, and now we're trying to actually back up and look at the system as, is Broadway the be all end all, and do we have to give them all of our energy? I'm sure I've talked for too long. I will shut up and let people respond or say something else. Please change the subject.
Well, I got one for you. So when I first came out here, everyone said, "Oh, you got to go down to Louisville for the Actors Theater's Humana Festival of New American Plays," right?
Mhm.
And I'm like, "All right, you know." And when I went the first time, I was like, "Oh, well, this is a lot of people. There's a lot of shows all at once." And that's, you know, and I tried to get a play in every now and then. Nothing happened. Fine, whatever. So flash forward, 18 years to where now I'm podcasting, and I've built an audience for what I write and what I want to do online. And this was one of the big anniversary years. And so all the plays started with this curtain speech. "We would like to thank the 40,000 people who come annually to the Humana Festival of New American Plays." And I actually don't remember the first play I saw that year, because all I could think was, when I first got here, that would have been a big number. That would have been like, wow, 40,000 people. And then at that point, my only thought was, I get that audience every week worldwide, and I don't need a $10 million budget to do it.
Mhm.
So what's wrong with that equation? And I actually said to, afterwards, I was like, I went up to the associate artistic director at the time and said, I got to tell you, I mean, it's great, the number, but here's my number. And she went, "Holy word, I probably shouldn't say, because this is a family friendly show. How do we get those people in the building?" And I said, "Well, you work with podcasters who make theater." And then COVID hit. So,
Of course.
but
So great. Theater is constantly being redefined for us within our own lives, around us, based on where we are and what we're doing. I want to go to one of the questions that's been actually sent in for us. Hank Boland asked, Alex, you mentioned earlier that you believe, theater can be done without an actor, without a performer. But the question is, can theater be done without an audience? And so what are your thoughts?
I don't think theater can be done without an audience. I think that is an essential element.
Yeah. So here would be, I don't know, the thing that I think of. So then, are we doing theater when we're in rehearsal room?
I was just going to say, aren't the people who are watching you, who aren't actually taking part in it? So the stagehands who may have a lot of downtime, the costume people who have finished their work, they're still audience. We're still making something and doing it in front of them. We're still getting feedback from them. We need their feedback in rehearsal, because it gives us a clue what is
Sure.
going to hit with an audience, a real audience. Maybe that's enough of an audience too. I have done shows where we've outnumbered the people in the seats, which
all
that's
of us
fun.
But there's got to be an audience, yes?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
I mean, if I'm doing a one-man show and I'm just running my lines in my living room,
You're just delusional.
that is not theater.
I'm gonna push back on that a little bit.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. My opening statement about how theater is personal for everyone.
Yep.
Maybe the teacher in me, I'm a big fan of process, and I think theater is about process. So if you're focused on product, which is audience, then I think you're delusional and you're doing it for the wrong reason. Right? Because I do think it is about self-reflection and your partners on stage. And yes, you need to have that communal experience inside. But like, the theater process is so long and it evolves. So it's just not about the audience. I agree. You want to have that communal experience. But I don't think we could shortchange. My wife right now is working on almost a one-woman show right now. Don't tell me that's not theater when she's running her lines, because it is.
That's true.
I
That's
just want
true.
to point that.
I got one for you too. I did a one-man show about Vincent van Gogh years ago. I was just the writer. I don't get up and do the one-man show. And in between the first time we produced it and the second time, my mother had passed away. She had been a theologian. And, and I processed it. It's not like I was dwelling on this or anything. And so we're remounting the show. My actor gets up. We're just running lines. And it's, no inflection, no nothing, right? It's just get the words back in my head. And so I'm sitting there on book, and he's just walking in circles around me. And he gets to this point where it's the part of Vincent's life where he tries to be a minister. And because part of the commission was, can you include one of Vincent's sermons? Because we have a couple of them. I said, all right. And so it has the sermon, and then it has the person explaining what he's talking about, because it's kind of an opaque sermon. And as we're doing this with no acting, no inflection, no nothing, and I just start tearing up. And the actor stopped. He's like, are you okay? Because I'm not doing this really well. I'm just reading it. And I said, no, I didn't realize this. This is the kind of thing my mother would have written. This is exactly how she would have described that sermon. And I had no idea. I discovered it in the room that night. And that's still one of the most magical moments of theater I've ever had. And it was not acted, right? It was just, here are these words. And I knew the words. I wrote them. It's not like they were a surprise, but it was the discovery in the room.
The question of whether there's theater really going on in the rehearsal room when you don't have an audience. The feeling that I've always had is like, no, we're trying to create theater here in the rehearsal room, and once we have created it, then you only bring an audience in to share it. But the theater's already created. The theater was created weeks ago, in small pieces at a time, as we discovered that story in ourselves. And then of course, as a performer, it's always, when I discovered it, how can I revisit that repeatedly?
And Jamie, just to add to it, probably I'm just going to give, since Hank is probably, if he's listening, I'm just going to give him some shit, right? Like, purely like text wise, can it be what's his, because I know Hank would appreciate this, can it be made without an audience? Well, yes, of course, that's what we do. But but is it going to change with an audience? 100% yes. Which I think,
right,
not to get into semantics, but to get too academic, but I appreciate the question, but just to be clear about that response.
Because how many things change between the first performance and the 100th performance? How many things do you discover in the 50th performance?
How many things change from a Tuesday to a Friday night?
Right. And it's that audience. It's the observer effect. It's the Heisenberg uncertainty principle.
I'm curious what you all think of this. I think, do I think an actor running their lines on their own is the process of making theater? Absolutely. The same as, when the first lighting designs begin, that's making theater. Set. The first word on the first page is making theater. Is there a difference between making theater and then when all the elements come together, audience included? So, the rehearsal room, there's still a missing piece to the puzzle. So for me, that is still the process of the making of the theater.
Yeah.
And yes, things obviously changed in performance, as they always will, which is part of the reason I love theater. But it's really that last bit, that audience, that sort of like, I don't know, now you have theater. I don't know if that's the right way to say it.
It closes the circuit.
Yeah.
Yeah. The one thing I would say is that the thing that I started learning during the pandemic, when we were not really being able to have that live audience, is that I still love acting, but that was all I was getting. I wasn't getting theater. I wasn't getting that immediate communication with an audience or even with my fellow performers, because we just didn't have the means to do that in the theater I was doing. So there is something. There's that missing piece that we all know gets put into place the first time you have an audience there. There's also that first time that you have, I don't know, board members or whoever come into a rehearsal room and watch us stumble through. There's a piece of that happens. But as we're going through, that's what I mean by like we're making theater all the time from the first time we kind of gather together. But yeah, like you mentioned, there's just that last puzzle piece that gets dropped in.
I have an example that all the actors in the house will appreciate. Because of the pandemic, our first auditions are now self-tapes. And so if you're an actor, you've done 8 million self-tapes.
Yeah.
And when I prepare the role, when I learn the lines, when I put it on tape, it is theater to me when I'm auditioning for a theater play. But I will tell you that it's not theater. So I know I just said that it's not theater. If I could just be in the room and have a breathing person, the moment we were able to go back in the room and audition, I found that I actually didn't forget how to act. I didn't forget how to communicate. So all of that is to say that the struggle to make it feel the same when I have to do it on camera, and to have breathing people responding and nodding their head yes, or even ignoring me. It's incomparable. So
Agreed. Yeah, the big shift from auditioning in person and getting immediate feedback and making changes and taking direction and doing all the things that you are trained to do as an actor to, I don't know, I knocked one out on tape, I sent it in, we'll see.
It's kind of funny to see a group of actors doing a podcast series when they do their first live show, because they're not used to the laughter, they're not used to the reactions or the feedback.
Right.
And especially because some of our shows, we don't use professional actors all the time. And so they're not used to holding for laughs. They're, they think a thing is funny, but then they're surprised when the audience laughs at it. And yeah, there is an alchemy to it. It's not like anything else.
I think a struggle of self-taping auditions too, and I don't know if you guys can relate to this, is you can do multiple takes. And while that may seem like to your benefit, I like you end up getting into this spiral of like critiquing yourself.
Yeah.
And when you audition, you're not watching yourself. It's they're seeing you, they're seeing how your body moves, how your voice carries, how everything moves together. And with self-taping, I'm doing my best to communicate that. I'm watching it back. I'm deciding that's not what I thought I was doing, so I'm going to do it. And not that auditioning is ever like the most fun part of the job, but self-taping it really it makes it really laborious.
Yeah.
It's not a part that I enjoy at all.
There is one good part about it. You don't have to find parking. It's really the best part about auditioning on tape is you just don't have to find parking.
And you don't have to wear pants.
No pants.
That's true.
Most of the time.
Same thing with podcasting.
That's right.
I've said too much.
That's great. I want to move on. There's another question. Mentioning, Stacy, when you started off, you said that when you enter a theater, you know the rules of that place, and that doesn't matter where you go, you know those rules. So does that mean that those rules are sort of universal for theater? You know, that comfort level is the same no matter where.
I guess, is this to me?
Sure.
Since I brought it up.
Since you brought it up, I'm gonna say yes.
Well, all the things
You
that
can
flash
start.
through my mind are, theaters are set up in a lot of different ways. There's black boxes, proscenium. Matt did a play in a football stadium. I still think we all know church, going to church, the seats are facing a direction, and we all know what our relationship is, how close we want to sit to the action. It makes me think about promenade theater. When we started doing promenade theater back in the day with Sean Graney. I don't know if Strawdog did any promenade theater where the audience walks around the action.
No. Oh, yes, we did.
I got
Yes, we
really
did.
excited about those rules, the rules of engaging with the storytellers, with the actors as the audience, because I learned what they were, and I learned that I could sit on the ground if I wanted, so that the people behind me could see, and I could be really close because I like to be really close to the action.
Yeah.
I guess what I feel about those rules is there aren't a lot of places in the world that feel familiar to me. I feel often that I don't know what the rules are in a lot of places. I don't know how to engage in sports in a lot of ways. So when I go to the theater, I just feel like an expert. And maybe that's true or not, but I feel like I know how to receive and be a part. And the one thing here in South Bend, Indiana, they eat popcorn at the theater. So that's one thing that I'm struggling with in the live theater, is that they eat popcorn.
Well,
so
they have different rules.
They have different rules here, and so
Their church does communion differently.
we're negotiating
with popcorn
with that rule. Matt, do you have any thoughts on that?
Don't get me started about popcorn, because I'll.
No, the funny thing is that, like I said earlier, because I know the rules, I think that when I go into a new theater, especially, I'm kind of wanting somebody to say, these are the new rules, or this is how we're breaking those rules tonight.
Right.
Because not because I think the rules are constraining or that I don't like the rules, but I just want somebody to kind of break them because I'm so familiar with them, because I'm comfortable with that. I know the rules enough I can go with it when somebody breaks the rules. There's something comfortable about that, yeah, I feel a little bit like I'm an expert. But it is true that there are certain, I don't know, theater environments that I go into where I feel like I'm a bit of a heretic or something, that this is not my church, and that I may know the rules, but I'm also an imposter. So yeah, that's always
Well, it was a little bit of a learning curve when we started doing theater here, because this, like I said, it's a small rural town.
Mhm.
It's the county. I think the county population is about 30,000. So, it's not tiny, but it's small. We never had a single place that we used for a full season, right? So we're moving around town, and we did one show that worked really well in a coffee shop, and we had to figure out what are the rules for doing this in a coffee shop, because people already have an expectation of how they're going to behave when they walk in,
Yeah.
and they're going to be chatting. And how do we say, okay, time to shut up, it's time for the show? And we had to kind of make that the opening of the show, to say, hey, because it's set at an anniversary party, but it's an anniversary party full of strangers. Nobody in the room knows who this couple is. And it's a Canadian play. It's a 2-person show. It's delightful and dark and weird, but it really worked for that. But we had to figure out the first couple of nights we did the show, it took a while to get started. And once people were in it, then they were like, oh yeah, we came here to see a show. We're not just here to chat over coffee. And we had to figure out the rules for every different kind of building we were in.
You know, the thing that I never really thought about until like friends of mine would come to see a show at Strawdog, where you know you're climbing up to the second floor of a place that doesn't look like a theater, then you're walking through some steel door into a black box theater. That for them, like that was completely foreign. It wasn't what theater was, you know, and that the rules. They didn't know what the rules were for a place like that. Like they didn't know that you could walk downstairs and get a 30-pack of beer and bring it into the theater with them. That's foreign for most people. Probably should be. But you know, those were the rules. You could do that. So it was always interesting that sort of what I knew as Chicago storefront theater, for a lot of people, the rules there are really foreign.
Yeah.
You would never expect to be sitting this close to a half-dressed actor playing the role, and also I think they just sweat on me. You know, that those rules are very, very different for most people.
I remember the
Makes
first
sense.
time Kyle took me into Strawdog, whenever that was, that, you know, a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And, you know, and the people we're with were kind of like, oh, wow, this is a theater? Huh. And I'm just going, whoa, this is a cool space. Wow. Cause, you know, I'm used to going from place to place. And yeah, it's an interesting space, but yeah, people expect a proscenium or a theater in the round, and they expect ushers
and they expect to be a safe distance from fighting actors on the stage. And
yes.
sometimes that's
Oh,
just
yes.
not quite possible. So, yeah. The rules change no matter where you go, no matter what you're doing. Hey, we do have one other question that I want to get to, which is, especially for those of us who have been, let's say, doing this for a while. So what would looking back, what would your 10-year-old past self think about you being a theater artist? That 10-year-old you, what would that 10-year-old think about you being in theater?
10-year-old me would literally go, well, duh.
Yeah.
So, pretty much.
My 10-year-old self would be really, really confused.
Right. Yeah.
I think my 10-year-old self would be like, oh yeah, we get it. That checks out. Yeah, definitely.
Really?
Yeah, same here. I think I was 10 watching soap operas when I decided I wanted to be a dramatic actress, because those people on the soap operas, they knew what they were doing.
Yeah.
That was some good stuff.
I mean, I always wanted to be a writer. So, and I wrote whatever. But 10-year-old me was going around the house singing a lot of Cole Porter and saying, hey, I know you got Trouble from the Music Man. I got it down. So, you know, I still don't have the musical theater career yet.
Yeah, definitely 10-year-old me would be so disappointed that I'm not a major league catcher. So that's all. Like, whatever else you're doing, I don't understand, but damn, we didn't make it. And here, let's pick up this one as well. This one comes from Carmen Grizzlia. And he says, what's a theater lesson that you learned the hard way?
Wow.
I'll
got that?
I'll jump on that. Yeah.
All right.
It's really obvious now, and it's a little embarrassing to say that it's a lesson, because it should have been one that I knew. When Stacy and I got engaged, I finally realized that health insurance is probably a thing. And at that time, we were not required by the government to have health insurance. So I didn't have any. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to be a responsible adult and get some health insurance. So I decided to go get a job for money. And so I just decided to go be a blue man. And I thought, oh, I'm going to go be part of the blue man group. And that's kind of like, I was an actor at the time. I said, that's kind of like acting, right? It's the same thing. And I did it, and I got in, I did the training, and they got me into the show in Chicago. And then basically my attitude was so bad that they fired me. And it was the best thing for me, but it reminded me, like I was doing the right thing for the wrong reason, if that makes sense. I was trying to be responsible, but this wasn't the path. And I remember I was down on my luck, and I will not name drop, but a playwright friend, acquaintance of mine, met me, and I remember him telling me that he took what he called the vow of poverty, right? He finally said, I'm going to take the vow of poverty, and it is about the work, and you need to make that priority as opposed to financial gains or risk reward, all that. And that changed everything. In fact, Kyle, behind the scenes, right after that, that's what started my whole directing trajectory. And Red Noses was like basically the next thing that happened at Strawdog.
Wow.
I guess my point is, like, and I came home, and man, I went on unemployment, and being in your 30s on unemployment, and we still had to stand in line at the time. You couldn't do things. I mean, it was rough, but just that lesson of, doing the right thing for the right reason. My dad crams that down my throat all the time, and I didn't really learn it until then. Yeah. So that was a good lesson that I learned. Yeah.
Any other hard-earned lessons?
I don't know. I mean, maybe, like I said, just figuring out the rules from space to space in this little tiny town, because I was not a little tiny town person.
Yeah.
But I've had a pretty charmed life. I don't know.
I will say that the hard-earned lesson that I think of, at least, is that you should say no sometimes.
Yes.
You should
Okay,
say no.
Yeah. I can go with that.
I mean, I've actually always had the 3 rules, which are: you should only do a job if it's a role that you really, really want to play, if it's people that you really, really want to work with, or if there's a lot of money there that makes it make sense. And anytime I've broken those rules, especially if at least 2 of those aren't involved, it's always been a horrible, horrible experience. But the idea of being able to say no, there have been multiple times where, because of what I have going on outside of theater, there have been times where I should just say no. I wouldn't be able to audition for those 3 things within 2 days. I won't be able to do that, and end up having 3 bad auditions rather than say no to 2 of them and do a decent audition. There have definitely been times like that where I've then immediately regretted not saying no to something.
Jamie,
go ahead.
I got one more. A lot. My early career, I was a fight choreographer in Chicago, and that probably sustained our income for a while. And I learned very quickly on certain, I won't bore our listeners with all the stupid moves, but I learned certain moves not to do because I had sent some people to the hospital before. And that was a pretty intense life lesson, not just theater lesson. So my 21-year-old jerk face did some things they shouldn't have done. So as I teach now, I use that lesson to teach my students now.
It is a good lesson.
I think a lesson that I'm learning now, and I don't think I'm learning, it's a long, over a long period of time, I've learned this lesson about what is important theater and what is worth my time. Coming from Chicago and feeling like the work we were doing there was so important. Storefront, big theaters, small theaters, there were so many places to work. The pandemic changed a lot of that. Now I live in South Bend, Indiana, and we have a civic theater and a university. And we're trying to bring professional feeling theater to a community of people. There's a lot of talented people.
Yeah.
Who knew? There's talented people everywhere.
Everywhere.
Who knew? They're not just like in New York and Chicago. So I think valuing this thing, to circle back to our first question, valuing this place that is one of the only places I feel at home. There can be something really, the lesson I'm learning is that it doesn't matter how much money is put into the production. It doesn't matter how much the tickets are. It doesn't matter if the play gets reviewed. It doesn't matter. None of those things matter. There's something sacred about the act of doing it. You go to a place, you do the thing, and you can make incredible art. And people in all kinds of places, people that are not in big cities, receive theater in such a pure, really different way. New York audiences are very intense, and Chicago audiences are very intelligent. When you share theater with different audiences in Michigan, South Bend, Iowa, these Midwestern places that Matt and I have made theater, I don't know, there's like a reward that feels different, not better, just different. And
Yeah.
I'm just learning to have a real respect and value for making theater, talking about social issues in places that people might need to hear things. It's not an echo chamber. It's exciting. And I never thought that I would say that. I think I've been a snob for a really long time about what real theater is. And
Sure.
so I think the lesson I'm learning is just how to value just the sacred art of making theater wherever you do it.
That's a great lesson.
Yeah, one lesson I learned here, thinking, playing right off of what you just said, when we finally got around to doing some of my scripts here, there was one year, it was Christmas time, we lucked into a place, and the owner said, "Can you do a show for Christmas?" And I said, "We don't have a Christmas show, but I can write one." So I wrote it really quickly. It was something I had in my notebook. It's whatever. And as I wrote it for the actors we had. I didn't even, I wasn't even messing around. I'm just like, I know we have these people. And so there's one scene that has one actor. One actor was in only one scene. And as we get to the dress rehearsal, this is, 4 days before Christmas. And I suddenly realized, as I'm watching them do this, I went, oh, I screwed that up. This scene would be so much better without that character. I was a lazy writer because I needed that character to do this. And now I know how to do it better. And there was the perfectionist part of me that was like, oh. And at the same time, I'm not firing an actor 4 days before Christmas. So I just said, it's small town. I don't care.
Yeah.
We'll just do it. And the show sold out. Every performance, everyone was on their feet. They loved the show. And a couple, the college that's here, a couple of the English professors came through and they loved it. But I felt free to say to them, "Did you see where the writers screwed up?" And they said, "No. What do you mean?" And I explained, "Well, here's how I'm going to revise it, because it will make it better. It will tighten it up. There's better foreshadowing. It's, all this stuff." And they went, "Yeah, you're right. That'll be better." But this was great, right? And that lesson was, we don't have to make this the 4-star perfect production of something. People want entertainment, and they want that experience of living those lives in the room with the people, right? And so whatever else I may have thought about that scene, and whatever else I thought I was going to improve about that show, those characters were still effective for the rest of that play, and that story was still effective for the people who came to see it. And maybe we develop things too much. Maybe we take too long. Maybe we should make more things instead of making one thing many times over the course of several years.
Yeah. All good lessons. Hey, I'm gonna pick up one other question here. We've been talking about our jobs in the theater. What other jobs have you had outside the theater? And what would you be if you weren't doing theater? I say this as a slot machine designer. So
Ooh,
I have my answer to that
interesting.
question. Is that I design slot machines,
I mean,
and honestly stumbled into that through connection over years, through connections through that honestly started in theater.
sure.
Um,
I do marketing by day. That's the day job. And I still approach it like a storyteller. It's like, how do you tell a story in a
yes,
poster or a postcard or a campaign?
yeah,
If I weren't a theater artist, I'd probably be doing that. I'd probably be telling stories in some other medium. It's live and breathe that. It's what I do.
yeah.
So, no, I'd be a particle physicist.
I currently work in like marketing a bit as well. I work as freelance as like integrated producer for marketing,
It,
uh, like
Interesting.
photo shoots, video shoots, that sort of thing.
so many people that I meet in the marketing profession like have a background in theater, like or writing, because it is
Yeah.
storytelling, right? There's so many jobs that are storytelling ultimately.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
also think, and this may be like a whole other side conversation, but I think studying theater prepares you better for any other type of job than any other education. Like my ability to multitask, my ability to read people, my ability to be on time, like just so many things you don't think
Yeah.
about that really play into it. But I do that now. I think I would do that if I wasn't in theater. I really enjoy it, but I've done the full gamut. I've been a bartender. I've catered. I've nannied. I've
Sure.
sold exercise equipment. I've done anything really to pay the bills.
Exactly. Honestly, the hardest working people I know are people who are in theater because they're doing theater and you know that they're doing something else because they have to. And
Yeah.
so those are people who are always working two jobs that are both full-time jobs. Yeah. What other jobs? How about you, Matt? What other jobs have you had?
Let's see. I did a lot of fitness, personal
Oh
training.
yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I did that for a while.
Oh yeah.
Uh, if I were, that was my main. When I was with a theater company, I did all the development, grant writing, box office, but that was all still in theater. I think for someone who almost got kicked out a couple of times of school, I kept going back to school, which is really odd. So I feel like there's a teacher inside me. I mean, I feel like I think there is because that's part of my day job too is to teach.
Yeah.
But I think that will always been. I wish, and I mean this honestly, like I did not know when I was younger that I had a very what I would call like an aggressive curiosity, which I think I know I can frame that now and name that now. And I wish, not I wish, there were parts of me that thought if I really would have paid attention to science and being a physicist, gosh, if I was in a cancer research center, I would not give up and I would be persistent and I would knock on everyone's door and I would work too hard and I might make a difference. Not that we don't make a difference in theater. So there's a piece of me that just thought, gosh, if I was a better student when I was younger and I had those interests,
Yeah.
because the curiosity I feel like is the creativity specifically in science and innovation and trying to cure diseases and all the things that are going on. I always felt like, not always, just the past 10 years, I thought, oh, if I could have harnessed that way, could I have made a difference? But that's a question. So that's my story.
Yeah. Like I said, I mean, everybody I know in theater is driven. Like you're not in theater if you're just sort of like, I kind of like doing it, I guess. Unless you're independently wealthy, and you know, there are a few. There are a few.
That's the big elephant in the room that no one wants to talk about.
Okay.
All these trust fund babies.
Yeah.
During their 20s, they're going out and having coffee with people, and by the time
So
they're mid-30s, they're taking over theaters and directing shows. And you're like, how did you do this? We were working 18-hour days. Like,
great. That's my next question. When did you realize that most of the people that you work with in theater are funded by somebody else?
Oh, late. I was
Too late, always too late.
I was already, in my I was going to the grad school, right? When I
Yeah.
figured, oh, I need a piece of paper to prove that I'm smart because I don't have money. So yeah, early 30s, I guess.
Yeah.
It took me a while. I was pretty dumb. I didn't see it.
Yeah. Yeah. When you show up at an audition or something, or you're talking with friends about trying to get prepared and trying to do it in between your job and whatever, and you find out that they like worked on it all day because they don't have a day job, and you're like, I don't know how they do that. They have a really nice apartment though. I really like hanging out over there. And then suddenly it takes years to put those pieces together and go, oh, I get it. Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
growing up near McCarter Theater in Princeton, I had no illusions.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it took me forever. Ah. That's really good. Let's see what else we got here. Let's talk a little bit more about that then. So theater has no money, right? So that's my question for you. My final question here is what is the future of small theater then, without any kind of backing? This is not a question that can be like answered immediately, but
I'll say my one thing and I'll be done. And
great.
This won't surprise you because I'm part of a university system. I don't know if this answers your question directly, but what I have realized, professional theater has the talent. And and I say professional, and I'll say small theater as well. Even professional theaters don't have any money right now. Everybody's hurt.
Right.
Universities, we don't have the talent. Guess where all the money is? So I just want to say and some people have figured it out. David mentioned McCarter. There's a Princeton McCarter thing. Like there's a Trinity, Brown, Rhode Island. Some people have, and I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm just saying there are two institutions, the nonprofit theatrical institution and the academia world. We're kind of both wanting the same thing, and we're not all figuring it out. And now, because of the pandemic, we don't have to be in the same city to financially support each other or holistically support each other. So that didn't answer your question. I'm just tossing that out there as a possible solution to a new ecosystem that could really benefit all involved.
No, that does. That does.
And I would say, I've said this for years. I've said this to local small groups, and get a couple of GoPro cameras. Get the app that can cut between scenes on your iPad, cut between the cameras. Make your theater. Put it out there. The tools are out there to put things on YouTube, say, or to put them out as podcasts, or to make guerrilla performances that you just do in a park somewhere. Do what you can with what you've got. There's not the same barrier to entry. There's not the same need for money. If you just want to make your art, you can make it. If you make audio drama, you don't need to build sets or costumes or props. I'm just saying. There are options, and then those can lead to other things. Those can lead to bigger things. Who knows? But get people to see your art.
But David, the question that Jamie is posing us is the live theatrical experience, not podcast.
Right.
How are they and which going to thrive in this? That's the question at hand. So I'd be curious response to that.
If they can do the same thing to get their work out there. I know people who have lived in Louisville for decades who have never been to Actors Theater of Louisville. They've heard the shows for years. They do Dracula each Halloween. Okay. But they've never been. And why haven't they gone? It costs too much. Or they think, oh, they don't do theater for me. They don't do theater I'm interested in. Just get something out in front of them. Just say, hey, we're doing something for free.
What's your answer? I'm not hearing an answer. So what's your answer?
Well, making the art. I mean, how do you do it? You get two people with a puppet and go to a lunchroom and do the art. Just get attention for what you're doing. If you actually look at Actors Theater of Louisville's website, they've done a total rethinking of how they do work. The Humana Festival is gone. I kind of miss it. I got some issues about that. But they're doing transmedia. They're doing virtual reality shows. They're doing an augmented reality version of A Christmas Carol with one man on stage and animation, which was a lot cheaper than doing the 65 member cast show that they used to do. They're adapting. Is all of it going to work? I don't know. Do I think all of it is great? I don't know.
Well, thank
But
God.
they're
All right.
doing something.
Well, thank God we're
Hey.
putting those actors out of work. I love it.
Yeah, well, but better that the theater survives than
Oh yeah,
that it
Well-
collapses.
that makes sense. That's great.
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to have to wrap it up, even though I opened a big can of worms right here at the end. I really, this has been wonderful. I want to thank all of you for being here tonight. You're sharing your love of theater with us and with others. I just want to share my love of that with you. And I also want to thank Kyle Hammond, as we've mentioned, for creating and producing the show. And a big thank you to officehours.global and the DVE store. Thank You 5 is made possible by Strawdog Theatre Company ensemble members. Strawdog is run on a free theater model where our productions are available at no cost to anyone and everyone. We can only do this with generation donations from our community, and you can find information about donating or becoming a Strawdog member at strawdog.org and helping to continuously support our work. We'll see you next week for a conversation with more theater artists. Please submit your questions so that we have some new questions to answer next week. And if you want to join this, or if you have a friend who might be a great panelist, visit the strawdog.org Thank You 5 page and let us know. And thank you to everyone for watching.